Greetings again, everyone, and welcome to another episode of OSI Today, the podcast featuring news and views from around the Office of Special Investigations. I'm Wayne Amon from OSI Public Affairs, and I'm very pleased to be joined by a fellow Chicagoan today, the Executive Director of the Department of Defense Cyber Crime Center, Mr. Jeffrey Specht. Sir, as always, good to see you again, and welcome aboard to your first podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Sir, a lot has been going on today, and to put kind of things in a little bit of context for our listeners, we're recording this on January the 20th, which is a big day in the history, as it turns out, of DC3, and we'll get into that in just a couple of minutes. But first, we'd like to, for our novice listeners who may not be familiar with DC3, sir, what exactly is the DoD Cyber Crime Center in layman's terms, and what is it designed to do?
Okay. So as you said, the DoD Cyber Crime Center, which I'll refer to as DC3 from this point forward.
Yes, sir.
So DC3 was first stood up back in 1998, and really as an evolution of what all the law enforcement and counterintelligence elements within the department were doing throughout the 80s and 90s when it came to digital multimedia forensics.
Right.
So the Department of Defense in 1998 made a decision to consolidate, centralize that under the DoD Cyber Crime Center, DC3,
right.
Principally for digital multimedia forensics and cyber training back in 1998. And that's all DC3 was at the time.
Right, right.
We've since evolved where we still do digital multimedia forensics, we do cyber training, but we've added a number of mission sets beyond that that have continued to evolve over the last 23 years.
Sure.
To include a technical solutions development shop, so we do research and development for both forensic tools and analytical tools to help both DC3 in execution of its mission, as well as the customers that we support. We stood up an analytical group to better understand the adversary and what they're doing in cyberspace, to inform investigations and operations, and to provide operational leads for those that have the authorities to execute those investigations and operations. We stood up a mission that we call the DICE, which is the DoD Collaborative Information Sharing Environment, which is a public-private partnership with the Defense Industrial Base to share cyber threat indicators. That's us as a government furnishing indicators to the Defense Industrial Base, and that is in turn the Defense Industrial Base sharing with us indicators of what they're seeing in cyberspace in terms of attacks on their infrastructure and their networks. That can
so there's a real synergy is developed then.
Absolutely. So that's been a partnership that's been in place since 2008. And then the latest mission that we stood up at DC3 is the DoD Vulnerability Disclosure Program, which is a partnership with ethical hackers. Currently, it's about 2,000 ethical hackers around the world that have an open invite to identify vulnerabilities on DoD information networks, particularly DoD publicly facing websites. And as they identify those vulnerabilities, they identify those to DC3. We do some validation, some triage, then we share it with the JFHQ DODN, which in turn then works with the elements within the Department of Defense that own those websites to fix those vulnerabilities. So it's kind of getting left of boom of understanding where those vulnerabilities are on DoD, again, publicly facing websites to close that. And so that's the protection of PII, it's the protection of operational information.
Again, for our listeners, PII is, once again,
personally identifiable information.
There you go. Correct. Kind of things that they can identify with.
Absolutely. So the protection of our service members. So think the OPM breach where all of our information was stolen from our background investigation. So that equates to PII.
Sure.
So a variety of different missions under the umbrella of what is today DC3, and a lot of synergy between each of those 6 missions. That again brings to bear a capability for not just the originating law enforcement and counterintelligence community, but the DoD at large.
Wow, that's quite a for lack of a better term, quite a laundry list of things that fall under DC3's umbrella. Now, before we dive into the history-making news made by DC3 today, sir, let's shift gears a little bit, and I have to ask this, and I've asked this of all of my guests so far because of it's been the elephant in the room now since about March of 2020, and that's COVID-19. How gratifying is it for you to see the way your organization has adapted and overcome the challenges of the pandemic to keep performing its mission at such a high level?
Yeah, so multiple words, astounding is one of them. So I was one of those, and many in government, that was a relative naysayer to telework before COVID.
Right.
So you maybe foresee 10 to 20% of the force effectively teleworking.
Right.
COVID obviously drove a completely different paradigm. So we have been since March We've been operating at about 75% telework.
Hmm.
And what's amazing about that is, one, the rapid evolution of how we do the mission, and two is the level of productivity that has been not just sustained, but no kidding, increased. So
Really?
again, the 6 LOEs, the lines of effort that we have within DC3 that I
Right.
talked about previously, our level of productivity in all 6 of those lines of effort actually increased throughout
Wow.
the pandemic. It didn't decrease.
Wow.
The one negative impact we had, and when I say that our productivity increased, for our laboratory and what we do with digital multimedia forensics,
Sure.
because of the impact of COVID, and I think probably arguably less proactive investigations among the law enforcement and counterintelligence community,
Right.
we had less influx of new evidence. But the manner in which we process it and the days in lab, our ability to turn evidence as it came in,
Right.
again, a tremendous improvements, and again, due in large part to an evolution of how we do the digital multimedia forensics,
Wow.
and enabling our examiners to do it remotely, which is something that's new as well. So, no, incredibly impressed with
That speaks
how we
volumes for you
develop.
folks.
Yeah, just innovation. So it's constantly evolving and figure out how to accomplish the mission, and no matter what the environment is or circumstances that you're presented with.
Wow, outstanding. Now, sir, last year in an OSI Global Reliance magazine article, and I'm holding it in my hand right here for those you listening, you wrote about the origins and evolution of DC3. Now, earlier today, that evolution continued in a major way with the establishment of DC3 as a field operating agency. Now, for context, once again, in the structure of the United States Air Force, a field operating agency, or FOA, is a subdivision of performing field activities beyond the scope of any major command. And those activities are specialized or associated with an Air Force-wide mission and do not include functions performed at management headquarters. Now, all that being said, what does it mean for DC3 to now be recognized and perform as a FOA?
Yeah, so to me, I mean, so for the wide variety of folks that we support across the Department of Defense, I think it'll be seamless. I mean, so for DC3 and me personally, I think it's recognition of the evolution I just described. So it's where we started back in 1998. It made sense for us to be what we've been structured as historically, which is an operating location.
Right.
So we have been up until the 15th of January, which was when the FOA took place.
Right.
So effective date was the 15th of January.
Sure.
Up until that point, we have been an operating location of headquarters OSI. If you look across the entire structure of OSI, most of their operating locations are 2 to maybe upwards of 8 people.
Right.
We DC3, because of the evolution that we talked about, we no kidding are operating now with a force of around 500.
Wow.
And the complexity of the various missions that we execute, not just in support of law enforcement and intelligence, not just in support of the Air Force, but really in support of the Department of Defense at large. I think it's recognition of that evolution, and from my perspective, just an overdue restructuring to provide the recognition that DC3 is operating as a DoD level and really performing the mission of a field operating agency in terms of the complexion of the mission that we have.
Yeah. In doing a little research on FOAs, I believe there's something like nearly 30 of them in the Air Force. So DC3 is in some pretty select company, which is again speaks volumes.
We are. So 2 other sister FOAs within the Air Force. One is OSI. So OSI is a field operating agency, and then a FIA, which is the Air Force Inspection Agency, also a FOA. And all 3 of those now will be aligned under the Inspector General of the Air Force. So we're not going far. In fact, the relationship with OSI will be sustained.
Right.
But so my boss, now Lieutenant General Sami Saeed,
Right.
is also the boss of Commander Terry Bullard, as the commander of OSI.
Yep. General Bullard. Right.
General Bullard.
Yeah.
So, so not going far. So we will just be a FOA under the umbrella of the Inspector General, again, continuing to support the law enforcement counterintelligence mission, supporting the Air Force, and supporting the Department of Defense.
Very good. Now, sir, before you assumed the executive director post at DC3 back in November of 2018, you were the executive director at OSI for 6 years. Just how did your tenure with OSI posture you to assume the DC3 position?
Yeah, so I share this fairly transparently. So I was in the front office of OSI for 6 years. So I was the executive director for OSI after a career, and I'm still an OSI special agent, which I'm very proud of.
Right.
Again, having sat in the front office of OSI for 6 years, and again, OSI owning DC3 in terms of as an operating location,
Mm-hmm.
I will admit to everybody that asks me, I was relatively blind, and I think most in the front office of OSI were relatively blind to what DC3 had evolved into.
Mm-hmm.
So bringing the experience of having had the honor to be the executive director of OSI for 6 years, and the partnerships I was able to develop through that mission, and that optic, and the boards that I sat on,
Yeah.
and really have a very comprehensive understanding of the law enforcement and counterintelligence missions throughout the Department of Defense, and bringing that optic with more recency to the DC3 position,
Right.
and getting a better understanding of how DC3 had evolved over the years, and all goodness in every one of those evolutions. It's for the best of the Department of Defense. I wholly believe that.
Right.
I think coming directly from OSI with that recency of having been in the OSI front office, of really understanding, again, also how law enforcement and counterintelligence requirements had evolved.
Sure. Sure.
And bringing that understanding to DC3 to really better focus DC3 on how do we continue the evolution and move forward in supporting the wide variety of DoD requirements, but not lose sight of our founding requirements of providing strong support for the law enforcement and counterintelligence community. So that is very high on my radar.
Right.
It will be throughout my tenure of again, maintaining that foundational focus of law enforcement and counterintelligence, and doing so in a way that doesn't negate, again, the continued evolution in other lines of effort that are equally as important, but not more so than our founding requirements.
Yeah. Now, your transition from OSI's executive directorship to the one here at DC3, would you consider that then the OSI experience making more of a seamless transition for you into the DC3 position? Being, like you said, being able to understand them a little bit better and more thoroughly than maybe before?
Yeah, I think so. So two different organizations. Again, although part of the OSI family,
Sure.
again, based on that evolution, they DC3 is just a different mission set than I think, again, from the OSI front office that I understood.
Sure.
But in terms of the transition, so I replaced retired vice commander of OSI, Steve Shirley, who'd been in that executive director position for 14 years.
Yes, sir.
So I'm not the first OSI agent to go over there, and I don't believe I'll be the last.
Right.
So I think it is a natural transition. I think it helps maintain that foundational relationship with, again, not just OSI, but with the law enforcement and counterintelligence community.
Very good.
So no, it was definitely an easy transition. It was very welcoming from the DC3 team, and again, it's a job that I've been in for a little over 2 years now, and I've loved every day of it.
Very good. Yeah, I can tell you the way you talk about it. It's almost kind of like a labor of love. That this is what you were meant to do, basically.
I'm enjoying it.
Now, sir, in researching some of OSI's most notable cases recently through the years for our Global Reliance Legacy Edition magazine, I came across a story about OSI special agents creating a disc splicing technique that produced evidence to convict a first-degree murder suspect and sentence him to life in prison. DC3 specializes in repairing damaged media and extracting evidence for court proceedings. Now, as the executive director, how impressed are you with the expertise shown by your folks to help facilitate justice?
Yeah, so again, speaking very specifically to digital multimedia forensics, that is obviously a world of continuous evolution as technologies evolve. And so maintaining the expertise internal to DC3 to do, again, the elements of the digital multimedia forensics mission that not everybody is postured to do because of whether it's they shouldn't invest in the resources needed to do, again, stuff that's incredibly complex in terms of, no kidding, whether it's, again, the disc splicing or damaged media and putting a hard drive back together. So to have the expertise, to have the Faraday room and the other things that you need to do that properly. Again, that's why DC3 was stood up, so that each of the services is not investing in those capabilities independently, but they rely on a single DoD source to provide that for the department.
Yeah. Sir, you mentioned a Faraday room. Again, for our novice listeners, could you explain just briefly what that is, the Faraday room?
Yeah, and it would be at a novice level. So so Faraday room is kind of, it's almost, think of one of those like dustless environments.
Okay.
It's an enclosed area that it now allows you to do almost like it's I'm not sure what the technical term is, but
Right.
it's that very kind of white-gloved environment
Okay.
that removes all the dust particles and it allows
Is it
you to
kind of like a
operate.
little vacuum area?
Yeah, something along those lines.
Yeah,
yeah.
I see.
I'm not an expert.
Right,
for
right,
sure.
okay.
Yeah, but so our capabilities in that. So again, going back to the case you mentioned, which was the disk splicing, which was no kidding. Think back to floppy disks, and literally the suspect
Yeah.
took scissors. And cut a disk apart, and again, the presumption back then, and this was in I think the mid '80s, was hey, look, no data will ever be recovered off that disk.
Yeah.
And again, just innovation and testing various ways of how can you put that disk back together and actually glean data off it.
Sure.
So we continue to do that again. So you get hard drives that are smashed with hammers. You get now new encryption problems.
Right.
So the whole lawful access problem, where again technologies are becoming more capable from the commercial side. To prevent law enforcement lawful access, if you have the warrant and the permissions to get in, today's software is preventing you from doing that. So evolving those capabilities to ensure that the department and those that we support have that lawful access, and to be able to retrieve the information that they need in support of their investigation.
Sure.
I'll give you one real quick vignette. So we
Yeah.
had a case that again we're very proud of. So not law enforcement, not criminal.
Right.
But there was a flight mishap. So we had a plane, it was a Navy aircraft that had crashed in the ocean, and it literally sank to about 18,000 feet below sea level.
Wow.
And this was submerged for over a year. They finally were able to salvage what they needed to. And there was, think, kind of the black box or other digital evidence that would come off that flight. After having been submerged, again, 18,000 feet of salt water, we were able to, no kidding, do digital multimedia forensics on that device and extract in excess of 90% of the data off of that device.
Wow.
So again, it's just a highly skilled expertise to do very complex examinations.
Unbelievable. Very good. And that's kind of, you mentioned evolution, that kind of ties into my next question here. These days we hear a lot about the need for law enforcement to keep up with the ever-evolving challenges presented by our adversaries. And as you just mentioned, I guess that would be a pretty fair assessment to make about DCI. You're continually evolving, continuing to keep up, like you said, stay left of the boom, to try to be ahead of the adversaries instead of just keeping up with them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll go back. On that one. My point to talk on that was the lawful access. And again, this is a growing problem for law enforcement and counterintelligence, that as privacy expectations remain constant, where folks, when they buy devices, they want to know that it's secure.
Right.
But the level of complexity that now commercial vendors are putting into the security of these devices, enabling lawful access, is becoming more difficult. So I think the San Bernardino shooting a couple years ago, where again we have a cell phone seized from that terrorist incident. And it's a device that, no kidding, law enforcement could not get into for an extended period of time, and through proper court requests to get lawful access, to get associated permissions. And again, it came down to digital multimedia forensics and some very smart individual that knows that world that found an avenue to get into that device and to defeat the security provisions to ensure that we have lawful access to gain the information that's needed in support of an investigation.
Wow. Well, it's incredible. Just listening to you talk about this, so much goes on behind the scenes that goes into making sure justice is served. It really is kind of eyebrow raising, at least to a novice like myself, as far as that's concerned.
No, and think that so you add to that the complexity of IoT, Internet of Things. So now no kidding, you've got agents that'll walk into a crime scene and literally you can have a refrigerator that may contain evidence that's vital to that crime. You've got Alexa devices, Google Home, all these Internet of Thing devices, and how do you, no kidding, extract data off of those devices that might be of evidentiary value to a crime?
Right.
Apps. So every cell phone now, you've got the App Store, and you can download any variety of applications. Every one of those applications has a unique element of security. So how do you navigate that security for that individual, not the phone, but the app itself?
Wow.
Where's the data housed? How do you get access to that data?
Wow.
So federating the capability of understanding how those applications work, what the security is behind them, and how do you, no kidding, obtain the digital artifacts from those devices to be able to inform an investigation or an operation. So incredibly complex.
Wow, no doubt. Now, going back to that Origins and Evolution magazine article of yours, you mentioned an original operating location footprint of about 14 people, which had grown to approximately 450, at least at the time of the article, and as you just mentioned earlier, close to 500 military, civilian, and contractor personnel today. That must speak volumes to the growing importance of the services that DC3 provides. Do you have any further thoughts on that? I mean, you are now thought of as like the go-to agency, for digital forensics and things along that line.
Yeah. So part of the evolution I didn't talk to previously. So it's maintaining the focus on foundational law enforcement and counterintelligence,
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time recognizing a DoD Center of Excellence for Digital Multimedia Forensics. We're also one of 7 federal cyber centers for whole of government. Again, think tabletop exercises. How do we better share information across the whole of government?
Mm-hmm.
Cyber training, again, foundationally, our cyber training academy was built for law enforcement and counterintelligence. How to train investigators and those who do operations of how to recognize how the adversary operates in cyberspace, how to
Mm-hmm.
obtain information off of devices, how to
Right.
properly seize those devices.
Sure.
Even that mission set has again evolved towards a DoD-wide mission. So we're
Mm-hmm.
now involved in training cyber mission forces. We now have an international training mission, so we've trained the Australian MOD for their cyber
Right.
mission forces.
So it's a global reach now.
It's a global reach through the request and partnership of those who we support. So our engagement with our engagement with the Australians was at the behest of U.S. Cyber Command.
Right.
We're also involved in training on the law enforcement and counterintelligence. Those counterparts, again, in coordination with OSI, with NCIS, with Army CID, to again ensure that we are best postured to support what their requirements are.
Very, very good. Sir, before we wrap up, is there anything else that you'd like to add?
No, I appreciate the time here today. I will tell you, so again, I'm here this morning for the signing of some memorandums for...
And again, congratulations on becoming a FOA.
Thank you. Part of the commitment tied to this, again, evolution towards the FOA is again, that resounding and continued commitment to law enforcement and counterintelligence. And frankly, so while we will be a separate field operating agency in the Air Force, again, the relationship with OSI will continue. And certainly my role and my support and my focus on supporting, again, the entire DoD law enforcement and counterintelligence community will continue. So, again, we're not going far. It's a restructuring that I think is overdue, but it's not going to really change a whole lot about who we are and how we focus on supporting the wide range of customers that we're charged to support.
The beat goes on for DC3.
Absolutely.
Our guest has been the Executive Director of the Department of Defense Cyber Crime Center, Mr. Jeffrey Specht. Sir, again, thanks so much for taking the time. Really appreciate it. Good to see you again. And again, congrats on the Field Operating Agency designation.
Thanks, Wayne. I appreciate the time.
And thank all of you for listening. For OSI Today, I'm Wayne Amon saying so long for now.